Thank you, Honorable Senators. I'm here as an individual. I'm here as a medical cannabis consumer myself. I use cannabis on a daily basis for chronic pain and have since I was 30 years of age. I'm also here, I'd like to think, as a voice for the hundreds of people I've represented in the criminal and civil courts over the years of working in this field, victims of prohibition that did not deserve to be criminalized for their conduct. With that said, a brief history lesson. 16 years ago, the late progressive conservative Senator Pierre-Claude Nolan chaired the Senate Special Committee on Illegal Drugs, which issued a comprehensive 600-page report on the issue that currently occupies this body's deliberations. How should the Government of Canada deal with the issue of cannabis? I had the privilege of speaking with Senator Nolan many times about this, and he regularly reminded me that he'd come to the issue a staunch opponent of legalization. As a father, he said to me, he was mainly concerned about the impact on his children. Senator Nolan, however, allowed and indeed demanded that the committee use a rigorous review of the evidence to drive its conclusions. And there was much evidence. This Senate study remains one of the most comprehensive analyses of cannabis and cannabis policy ever conducted anywhere in the world. The report began by acknowledging that at its most basic, the discussion is really not about people consuming cannabis. Under Prohibition, Canadians consume plenty of cannabis. We grow it, we sell it, and we consume it in vast quantities. As the committee pointed out, the issue is really about whether criminalizing millions of Canadians for those personal choices is good public policy. The committee grounded its analysis in principles that should serve as guides to this body. Good public policy should promote freedom for individuals and society as a whole. The proper role of the state is based on respect for autonomy and individual and societal responsibility. Ultimately, Senator Nolan and the rest of the 9-member committee determined in 2002 that criminalization was bad public policy and concluded, quote, the state of the knowledge supports the belief that for the vast majority of recreational users, cannabis use presents no harmful consequences for physical, psychological, or social well-being in either the short or long term. The committee also concluded that it was prohibition that actually caused the most harm to society. The main social costs of cannabis are a result of public policy choices, primarily its continued criminalization, while the consequences of its use represent a small fraction of the social costs attributable to the use of illegal drugs. Concluding that cannabis prohibition is harmful public policy, the committee recommended legalizing cannabis for Canadians over age 16 and granting amnesty to anyone previously convicted of simple possession. The committee's specific policy suggestion may seem familiar. Quote, the committee recommends that the Government of Canada amend the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act to create a criminal exemption scheme. This legislation should stipulate conditions for obtaining licenses as well as for producing and selling cannabis, criminal penalties for illegal trafficking and export, and preservations of criminal penalties for all activities falling outside the scope of the exemption scheme. Honorable Senators, this appears to be precisely what Bill C-45 proposes to do, and the Government of Canada should be commended for now moving forward with reforming our cannabis laws. That said, I disagreed then and I disagree now that a criminal law-based approach is appropriate. At most, cannabis should be treated in the same general way we treat alcohol, a much more dangerous substance, a regulatory approach with extremely limited offense provisions. And I dare say that the Senate committee believed that any vestige of a criminal law-based regime should be extremely limited, because one of the report's guiding principles is that, quote, only offenses involving a significant direct danger to others should be matters of criminal law, end quote. In the intervening 16 years, we've learned much more about both the harms of prohibition and the impacts of legalization. We've seen experiments in legalization, both tacit and explicit, at home and abroad. We've had a system of legal access, including legal home production, of medical cannabis since 2001 in this country. We've had a system of commercial production and sale for medical purposes since 2014, which now has 300,000 participants. We've had a system of relatively open and widespread dispensary access in many major cities in Canada since 2014, and more limited dispensary access for more than 20 years. You can't walk 10 blocks in the city of Vancouver or downtown Toronto, or for that matter, Hamilton or Victoria or Seattle or Denver or Los Angeles without passing a storefront selling cannabis. These stores are selling, at least in Canada, so-called illicit cannabis openly and safely right now in almost every city and town in British Columbia and in most major population centers in every province in this country. This scares some people, and I understand that. Change is scary, particularly when you aren't familiar with the things that are changing. But I also understand that the evidence is clear that we have not seen and will not see the types of harms that so many seem to fear. Chaos does not reign in Vancouver. Every day you see people walking past dispensaries, and some going in to shop, just like they do every other store. 1 year after this change is implemented, I suspect we will mostly be wondering what all the fuss was about. I do have 4 specific recommendations. First, I want to reiterate my objection to a criminal law approach because such an approach will continue to have significant negative external consequences, such as the continued disparate enforcement against visible minorities and those with less economic means. I hope that we move beyond this approach swiftly. But at the very least, we must be expunging criminal records for simple possession so that our previous bad laws are not anchors weighing down our fellow citizens' life prospects. We should also remove all criminal penalties in C-45 associated with simple personal possession and production of cannabis. On that point, secondly, I want to emphasize that lawful personal gardens are critical aspects of this reform, allowing commercial production and sale, but criminalizing people, Canadians, with penalties of up to 14 years in prison who want to grow the exact same plant for themselves at home turns the point of legalization on its head. Legalization should and must be about not criminalizing individual Canadians for cannabis. The development of a vibrant industry will of necessity follow. Third, and as a parent of 4 children under 18, this comes from my heart. We must not criminalize young people in our pursuit of our laudable goals of trying our best to keep them safe and give them the tools they need to make responsible choices. We've tried the criminal approach. It isn't working now, and as the Senate committee determined, it is actually the single most significant source of harm from cannabis. A criminal penalty of up to 14 years in prison for a 19-year-old that shares a joint with her 17-year-old cousin is abhorrent and morally insupportable. Fourth, as we implement these changes, we must be looking for ways to transition the existing underground cannabis economy out of the shadows and into the light. This change is scary for them, too. Most, 95% of the domestic industry, are not involved with criminal gangs or violence in any way. I've represented hundreds of these folks over the years. They are small farmers, small shopkeepers, and people that love this plant. They are also a rich source of knowledge and experience, and let's be very blunt. If we don't bring them into the fold, many will likely to continue to operate outside of it. That is not good public policy. Finally, I want to thank the committee for the opportunity to address this critical issue. I also want to thank Canada for taking this step and bringing in legalization 1.0. It is not perfect, but it is an important first step. I look forward to your questions.